One of the Toronto Blue Jays' biggest strength is the depth that they have at the catcher position. Now, there's some holes at left field, there's some holes at the DH position, but as it stands right now, the Blue Jays have one of the best catching tandems in Major League Baseball, and if they can be healthy and play right, then that's scary. So we'll break that down and much more in this episode of Jays Digest. What's up, Jays fans? I'm your host, Peter Vryonis, alongside host Nick Gosse. Now, it sounds cliche, but one of the biggest offseason acquisitions that the Blue Jays can make is to have their catching tandem be healthy and be firing on all cylinders, because we saw what that was doing for the Blue Jays in 2022 when Danny Jansen managed to stay relatively healthy and put up the best offensive season of his career, and when Alejandro Kirk was an all-star and playing like a silver slugger. So when those two guys are really clicking and playing at their full potential, that really gives the Blue Jays an extra middle-of-the-order bat. It gives them a lot more flexibility, and it makes them a much better team.
Yeah, and like you said, the biggest improvement this team could have, no matter what offseason moves they make, is in that catcher position. So we'll discuss all that. Before we get into it, a quick reminder to hit the subscribe button. We're on the road to 12,000, and thank you guys for your support. Now, Peter, we have a few things to discuss today. MLB Nerds dropped their top, however many it is, catchers. The Jays have two of them in there, and the catcher position is something we haven't discussed really at all here on the channel over the past, really since the offseason started, because of all the moves that have been hypothetically close to going down, Ohtani and all these things. And I think it's time we finally do it. Now, Peter, there's a few things to go over. Let's start with this, which is the top 20 catchers heading into 2024. And if you look there, they have Kirk at 16 and Jansen at 15. Now, you could argue, and I personally think that Kirk should definitely be higher, but this is kind of just a talking point into what our catching tandem could be. And I think this, alongside Vladimir Guerrero Jr. improving, is the X factor this season. Kirk had a down year last season. We've seen his going this offseason getting to the best shape of his life. Danny Jansen has always been one of the best catchers in baseball. It's just that he cannot stay healthy. Peter, if the catching tandem is what even a shell of what we know they can be, whether it's health, whether it's Kirk getting into shape and just performing to their peak, this could be the biggest difference for the Jays next season, alongside and probably behind Vladimir Guerrero Jr. returning to his MVP self.
Absolutely, but I'd argue and say that they can't be a shell of themselves. They can't be half of what their output it was supposed to be. They have to be really good. The Blue Jays have put themselves in the position right now where they need everyone to step up internally. They haven't made those moves. They haven't brought in those pieces to really expand this roster and allow them to have more depth and more offensive firepower. So you're relying solely on the guys that are in-house right now. And yeah, the biggest acquisitions that the Jays could make at this point are Vladimir Guerrero Jr. bouncing back, Alejandro Kirk getting back to a 285 plus hitter, and Danny Jansen staying on the field. It's that simple. We know how good he is when he's on the field. The only problem is that he can't stay on it. He's played 80 games, 72 games, and then 70 games the year after that. So obviously catchers don't play a full 162. It'd be unfair to judge him for not playing 162. But at the same time, you need him to get into at least 100 games because he's that valuable. He's that valuable behind the plate. He's that valuable as a game caller, and he's that valuable as an offensive power threat in a lineup that desperately needs power. The Blue Jays changed their approach last year for whatever reason. They tried to go to the opposite field. They tried to slap singles the other way. Danny Jansen didn't. He just said, screw it, I'm pulling the ball. I'm going to keep pulling the ball, and there's nothing you could do about it. And it worked out. He hit home runs whenever he was in the lineup.
And I think that maybe approach, especially with Matt Haig coming up from the AAA Bisons, that's an approach that hopefully will kind of translate into Vladdy being good this year. And there's a few articles. I'm not going to read this whole thing. You can essentially pause it and read it, but it's kind of everything you just highlighted. When Jansen is on the field, he's one of the best catchers in baseball. He's a very solid defender. He knows his pitching staff in and out. He's been unbelievable at everything besides, I guess, limiting his injuries, which is not really his fault necessarily. A lot of them have been absolute freak luck injuries. When you look at his stats, obviously Stavant doesn't really show the picture because he hasn't played enough games. But you look on the left there, Peter, he's approaching 800 OPS in each of his past three seasons, with 2022 being his best season, 855 OPS. Like, this is the slugger that we could kind of want in the middle or bottom half of the lineup. And again, the Jays aren't done yet. We saw Teoscar Hernandez sign with the Dodgers yesterday. If anything, that bodes well for the Jays going forward regarding maybe a Soler acquisition with all this. We're not going to talk about that too much today, but if they're not going to go out and get someone who's a slugger, then they really are relying on, especially an Alejandro Kirk bounce back, because Danny Jansen's never really had a down season when when he's been healthy. Kirk last season was, you could say it was luck, you could say it was whatever. He had a very poor season in everything besides defense. He's one of the best defensive catchers in baseball, and he had a sub 700 OPS. But I think with Kirk, his hitting skills are so good that I think he'll be good. But I mean, another thing to keep in mind here is maybe depending on the acquisition they get is going to play a lot into how much playing time both of these guys get, because if you don't want both of them in the lineup, that DH spot needs to be taken. And if you're getting a guy like JD Martinez who cannot play the outfield anymore, then you're going to get a lot more rest for Kirk and Jansen, which is probably a good thing in all likelihood given the way that they have been playing injuries throughout their career.
Yeah, I think they're both very good players, Nick. There's no doubt about it. But I also believe that the Blue Jays are a better team when one out of the two is in the lineup. I don't like when both of them are in the lineup because then you handcuff yourself. Alejandro Kirk has to run the bases. That's a nuisance in itself. You don't want that happening. So, look, you got to have one of those two guys in the lineup every day. It's that simple, and you got to get a DH. I think Alejandro Kirk's going to have a massive bounce back season, and because for these reasons, he doesn't strike out, and he takes walks. He's got great plate discipline. He's one of the most disciplined Blue Jays hitters on the team. So I'm looking at those peripherals there. Like, he has the opportunity to bounce back here big time, and he's a great defensive catcher, very underrated in that regard. Doesn't have the best throwing arm, of course, but he's great at framing and stealing strikes and really game planning with the pitcher. So I like what he's got going on over there. I think he's going to have a bounce back year, and same thing for Danny Jansen, man. He's just got to stay healthy. This fan base has been waiting for him to stay healthy for years now because we know how electric he is when he is on the field. It would be great if he can get into 100 games this season. It would really help the Blue Jays out.
Yeah, and the Jays have the best catching tandem, or at least one of the best, depending where you rank in the MLB. And we traded this season or this offseason last year, this time last year or a bit earlier, we traded our best top catching prospect in Gabriel Moreno, putting all the faith into both of these guys' hands. And obviously, it didn't pay off too much last season, especially because of the impressive and display of performance by Gabriel Moreno in the playoffs. But again, I'm with you. I think Kirk bounces back. I think last year was an anomaly, and we say not even how bad he was, but he was still better than most of the catchers or a lot of the starting catchers in baseball just because of his defense. And again, catching is a position where it's usually really hard to find a good hitter, and when you do find one, you don't give him up. And we have two of them, both of them specifically Kirk is very young. He's our catcher of the future, and even Danny Jansen is 28 years old. But Peter, I want to ask you this before we do wrap up. We obviously saw Danny Jansen in trade talks last year. I don't think those are going to happen this year, especially given the tandem now. But the question is Danny Jansen is now on his last year, I believe, of the contract. He's going to need to get renewed. Do you think they extend him? I think it's a no-brainer. You have to extend a guy like Danny Jansen, especially because of how familiar he is with the pitching staff. We've seen how well he was at least with Alek Manoah, and Kirk obviously started catching Alek Manoah towards the end of it. But I don't know. Do you re-sign Danny Jansen at 28 years old to a new deal, or do you think you play it out, see how this season goes, and maybe let him walk if he's still injury prone?
It depends. It depends if he can stay healthy this year. Obviously, we have a large enough sample size now of him not being able to stay healthy and not being available in that lineup day in, day out. So, yeah, he's a great player when he's on the field, but if he's only playing half the season for you, then you really got to think about giving him 10, 15, $18 million in free agency. I think that's what he's going to command. So, yeah, I would definitely be open to re-signing him. But he's got to stay healthy, and he's got to have one healthy season before you truly make that decision. And when it comes to Alejandro Kirk, the main thing for me, he's got to get some power back into his game, because that's a big reason why his OPS was below 700. It's because he had no power last year. His on-base percentage was still really good. He was still getting on base at a good clip, but he was hitting singles, and when Alejandro Kirk hits singles, it takes 2, maybe even 3 hits to get him in if you're not hitting home runs. And the Blue Jays were not hitting home runs last year. So the recipe for success for Alejandro Kirk, hit a few more doubles, hit a few more home runs. He's not going to hit 25 home runs, 30 home runs. He's not that kind of hitter. He's a balanced hitter that's going to hit for contact and get on base. He is what he is. He's not going to change. But you got to implement a little bit more power into your game, and you got to make it a little bit easier for your teammates as well. You can't keep putting them in those positions, having to drive you in with 3 consecutive hits. That's not sustainable at the big league level. So I want to see Danny Jansen stay healthy. I want to see Kirk implement some more power. And that's when the Blue Jays have the best catching tandem in Major League Baseball. We saw those rankings, Nick. They were 16th and 15th. I think that's ludicrous. I think they're better than
Yes.
that. And I think it's good that they're going in with little to no expectation this year because it was one of their big strengths last season. Didn't pan out. But I think they're really going to have a bounce back this year.
Yeah, and you see Gabriel Moreno there right after Danny Jensen to rub some, I guess, some more salt into the
Lazy.
wound.
It's a lazy list. It's a
Yeah,
lazy list.
which is
There's a reason why he's doing that, and he's doing it for clicks. I'm not a big fan of MLB nerds. Not big fan of those rankings either. 16th and 15th. I didn't even care about the ranking. I just wanted to show how much depth that the Blue Jays have at that position, and they do have it.
yeah. Let us know where you would re-rank at least these 10 catchers. But that'll wrap up the video. Let us know what your thoughts are in the comment section below, and also let us know, would you re-sign Danny Jansen now, or do you want to wait until the end of the season, like Peter said, to see the health? But if you want to check out our video from yesterday, click on your screen now. We'll see you tomorrow.